Okay, we'll get started now. Thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight. We'll probably have a number of stragglers coming in, so there'll be plenty of seats for them. So by way of introduction, I'm Ray Burkalt. I'm chair of the Finance Committee, and my fellow committee members, Pete Murphy, Mary Foley, Greg Zakarian, and Chris Berglund. So we're all looking forward to having this discussion tonight and to any questions that you might have. We're also joined by our town administrator, Heather Butler. Heather. And we have Norma Chunas from the SWAT committee hiding in the back. So we have school committee, Jim Padone with us. We have select board, Christina and Vanessa. No, you can't hide. We see you, even if you duck. Oh, Raj, hi, hiding back there. You get a certain age, you can't see the back row anymore. Okay, so this is our second presentation today. We did learn one lesson from the earlier presentation. We're going to change the format of the Q&A a little bit. We tried stopping every so often with the presentation earlier, and that got logistically pretty complicated. So we're going to go through the full presentation and take questions at the end. So if you do have a question, please come up to the microphone. If you can offer your name and address, that'd be great. Not mandatory, but usually helpful. From last year, for those that have come then, we did do a set of presentations last year, and I think the biggest lesson we learned, the most feedback we got was take it easy on all the charts and bar graphs and tables and whatnot. So this year we've really carved that back to just a few that we think really convey the message well. And with that, I think we're ready to get started. So Chris Berglund is going to take the first section of this. We'll be swapping out members as we go through the presentation.
Thanks, Ray. I just want to turn to the first slide here, and this is basically just a credit slide for all the cooperation we've gotten from our local town officials. West Boylston Town Accountant Leslie Gurton's been a huge help in assembling a lot of the data for this presentation. The West Boylston Public Schools, immeasurable amount of help that they've provided too. They have a very complex budget which changes intricately from year to year, and it's the help that they've given us a great understanding, so thanks for that. The West Boylston Town Administrator, Heather Butler, who's hit the road running in her early tenure here, but given us some great input. A lot of information has come from archived town meeting reports. Our town clerk has a great database for those reports, and she's been kind enough to provide us with some stuff. The Mass Department of Local Services, which is a division of the Department of Revenue. DLS is available to everyone for viewing. It gives some great introspective information on not only our community, but how we match up with other communities in the Commonwealth. And it's accessible, most of it's accessible to all of us. I think there are some that are just municipality-only sites, but it's really been a great benefit. We just have what's available to us as consumers. And last but certainly not least, the Solid Waste Advisory Team, who has worked very hard over these last months in addressing the issue of our solid waste disposal for coming years. Because as you all probably hear, it's not the same animal that it was 20, 30 years ago. So some of the topics that we're going to touch on today or this evening are just a brief overview of our property tax background as to where that's generated from, how we match up with some other communities. We're then going to move on to the operating budget, revenue, and expenses. And we'll notice a decent-sized gap in just how we are going to, next step would be to look at that gap and try to explain some of the reasons why it is so much more, I guess, it just stands out so much more than it has in prior years. Revenue growth is at 2.5%. As Pete will get into, our revenue, is comprised of tax revenue. 73% of the town's revenue comes from property taxes. And if we're limited to 2.5% growth, it's tough to keep pace with all of the other expenses that we've been having to deal with inflations and increases. And also, some of the challenges on the revenue side have come from a reduction in state funding, or state funding not keeping pace is another way to put it. They're not even keeping pace at 2.5%. So that's part of it. And then the pandemic relief funding. We had two sources of funding that came to the community during COVID days, if we'll all recall. There was a program called ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, that came from the federal government that was provided emergency funds that our community relied on for plugging some of these gaps. And as a matter of fact, is still relying on. I mean, we have taken some of those funds and actually put them into a fund to pay some of the costs that we have this year, and I think next year is the last year that we will be tapping them. But we've put them in, use them to offset operating expenses. When those funds are completely gone, then they come back and we have to fund operating expenses in another way. On the school side, they had funds from a program called ESSER. I'm not sure what that stands for, education. No, I mean, it's a nice, but that provided some nice relief for the schools to help them close their gaps, or work to close some of their gap, and that's over, that's gone. So they've had to look in many other places. And lastly, we will preview some of the options that we have coming up at this town meeting and at the ballot box moving forward for the coming year. We will be looking at a Proposition 2.5 override. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, you will be at the end of the night, at the end of the evening, we hope. But that's basically just allows us to, I'll get to the next slide, but allows us to tax a little above the levy, subject to voter approval, of course. And then some of the other options we looked at were reduction in services, reductions in personnel. I know the school's already taken some steps in that regard just to get to the budget they've gotten to. And reduction in programs, which is another way to kind of look another way to close a budget gap. And last but not least, what will be presented at town meeting and town election votes. So thank you all for coming to this event, and I'm going to encourage you once, and I'll encourage you probably many times tonight, but this is just one event. I want to make sure that everybody comes to town meeting a week from Monday. That's critical, and make sure your voice is heard. So our residential property tax rate, so what we've done here, and I apologize for the size of the slide, but we tried to get some of the local communities in on this slide as best we can. And what it basically represents, as Ray said, we're going to try to stay away from a lot of the numbers pieces and a lot of the graphs. But I'll go down the line. We've got Rutland, Leicester, Shrewsbury, Sterling, Clinton, Boylston, Holden, West Boylston's in red. And then we've got Berlin, Northborough, Princeton, and Paxton. So you can see we're a little to the right, which is a little bit on the higher side of the median, but you can see that yellow line is the median. So we're not way out of line. I mean, we're in line with our other communities. And I think that's important as we move forward, especially as we look at, what some of these challenges on the expense side. Proposition 2.5, I'm just going to give you a quick little tutorial on this. So the way that the town raises revenue on the tax side is everybody's property is valued. They come in with a total value, and that becomes the tax levy. We are able to tax at a rate that is approved by the Department of Revenue. And each year, we are allowed to look at that levy ceiling and add 2.5% to last year's levy ceiling. Now, last year's levy ceiling is not only the properties that were in use during the year, but also new growth that may have come on during the year. Neighbor builds a house, commercial property goes in, that adds to the tax levy, all right? The only other way, and we're limited by 2.5%, the increase on that tax levy. That's all we can go up. That's the Commonwealth. That's every community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has that same limit. The only other way that we can enhance that revenue above and beyond new growth is through what's called an override, which is basically coming to the town, to the voters, and saying, here's what we need, here's an amount that we need to increase our budget by for this year to provide what in our case, as close to level services as we can year over year. So that's what we're going to try to show you here this evening. Any levy, any tax levy, any budget approvals under the tax levy all require town meeting approval. So the only caveat to that is a 2.5 override, which is outside of just the normal levy permit. That requires town meeting approval along with majority at the ballot box, which is June 3rd, I believe. So that would be that. So that's the one caveat I have for that. Just going to give a quick look at operating budget, and then as I talked about a little bit, funding sources, we have taxation. That's limited to the 2.5%, property tax plus new growth. One of the things that constrains our new growth, obviously, is the nature of our town. We have a lot of conservation land, we have a beautiful reservoir, we have rail trails, we have, some things that a lot of other towns don't have. That also constrains how much we can grow. But taxation, a given at 2.5% increase year to year. State funding, year to year, we've seen decrease in some years to level state funding year over year. We're not seeing an increase to the level, not even to 2.5%. For instance, we have a lot of DCR land here, which is subject to what's called the pilot payment plan. So whether it be, I don't know if it's MWRA that governs that or DCR, but we are paid on at a rate for that land based on MWRA regulations. That's it. So they pay us. That has gone up, I think, when I look back 20 years, 1.2% or something like that over that period. I mean, year over year. It's really not even at the 2.5 rate. So that impacts us somewhat. Lastly, on the revenue side, and I mentioned earlier, ARPA and ESSER monies, those are gone. We had relied on those for the last few years. I mean, that was a substantial component of, paying some bills that would have normally fallen under the operating budget. On the expense side, programs and services, well, we're trying to stay at level service. That's really been the goal here for the recent years, and certainly is the goal coming into this year's budget season. Level services to the best that we possibly can. The schools, I know, have had to make some cuts in order to live with what we have for even some enhanced revenue, but that's the context of where we are today. Mandates, they're increasing. What's a mandate? So I'll give you a quick example of a mandate. On stormwater reporting and stormwater maintenance. So that's something that came from the EPA, the federal government. We have to go out And I think it was last year at our at annual meeting, at town meeting, the stormwater plan was approved. And it cost us money to have the plan written. It's costing us money to have the plan monitored. And if we fail to do that, we're subject to some significant penalties from the federal government. But, all that said, they're not paying for it. They're saying, here you go. Is that enhancing our lifestyle in town? Well, maybe it's helping some to know what's going into our runoff and everything. And I think we've been pretty good, pretty prudent about how we've handled that through the DPW, cutting back on salt and sand and stuff like that. But from the standpoint of, it's still a requirement from EPA, not funded anywhere except for out of our pockets. Insurance and retirement. Those programs have seen substantial increases. Health insurance and retirement. We're part of a cooperative retirement plan, the Worcester County, I believe it is, Worcester County Board. And we are one voice in a number of communities that participate in that. For instance, last year there was an enhancement was voted to that plan. I don't know that we supported it. I don't believe we did, but nonetheless, it passed. And so now we're at being part of that, we have to pay into it. Health insurance, we'll get into that a little bit more detail. And last but not least, inflation. Of course, we've all seen how that's impacted our day-to-day lives. It's impacting us in municipal life as well. We're seeing it as far as trying to attract good talent for different positions around the town, and competition from other municipalities in our area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Murphy, who's going to talk a little bit about revenue. Pete?
Revenue and expense. We're going to look at both of those. So here is a pie chart that kind of gives you a little indication of where the revenues are coming from. You can see 3/4 of the revenues coming from local taxation. That is, as Chris explained, that's the tax base from the previous year, plus 2.5%, plus any new growth. New growth is very small, so it's basically just an increase of 2.5%. State aid, as Chris pointed out, is something that's been level for quite some time. About 3/4 of that, the 13% of our revenues, about 3/4 of that goes to the schools in what they call Chapter 70 state aid monies, and about 1/4 of it comes to the town as municipal pilot grants. Local receipts are all the other ways that the town collects money. If you go to a restaurant or stay in a hotel room in the town, there's a tax that gets collected there. There's ambulance receipts is another way that we collect some local receipts. There's excise tax that you all pay on your cars. That's in local receipts. Any permits that you take out are usually in local receipts. And then there's usually every year, some small amount of additional revenue that we call other revenue. It's a relatively small part. Yeah, basically, this has been fixed. It hasn't increased significantly except the 2.5% we get to raise taxation every year. So what's happening on the expense side? What's driving the budget and causing our problems between income and expense? I told the other board members that this slide was too messy and too hard to see, but they insisted that we're going to go with it. So those of you in the back, later when we get to questions, please feel free to ask a question. But fundamentally, we have 5 categories of town expense here, and then we have the education expense, and then we have the last topic called other or non-discretionary. The 5 categories of town expense: general government, human services, cultural and recreation, have all been able to stay within or close to minimal budget increases. That situation which we call level funding. However, for public safety, we've had a pretty significant increase. And to some degree, Public Works, we're going to have an increase, which we're a little unsure about right now because it involves signing a new trash contract. So Public Safety, we have a 13% increase. Why did that happen? That's primarily because of fire. And what's happened is that we used to have a call-out fire department situation where if we had a fire, we had trained firefighters who were not on the payroll, but were available as volunteers to show up at a fire with their gear and take part in that effort. As the years have gone by, that's gotten expensive. It's gotten hard to attract people into that position. And we basically have gotten to the point where we have no call-out firefighters anymore. And so we have to, in order to meet NFPA regulations, in order to have an adequate staffing, we have to add staff to the fire department, which we've done, so that we can have at least 4 firefighters on duty at any time. And when I say firefighters, they're also EMTs. They're running the ambulance service, and they do earn some funding out of that. The other thing that's happened with firefighters is it is a dangerous job. It does require a lot of training. They are having to spend a lot of time and money to become trained firefighters, and they are expecting higher salaries. And our fire department has been unable to attract firefighters until they increase their incoming beginning wage. And that also has impacted this increase. And so there's a pretty substantial increase there in public safety for primarily the fire department. The education, the schools have done a pretty good job. If you look across there, you'll see that the education budget is going up only by 2%. They did also have a significant increase, but they were able to make some budget adjustments. They also had to let go 9 employees in order to keep that budget in control. But the education budget's not been the problem. What has been the problem, in addition to the problem with the firefighters, is this non-discretionary. And you can see that that's going up an 8%, and there's nothing we can do about it. That word non-discretionary simply means we have to pay the debt on loans that we have. We have to pay for insurance for employees. We have to pay the medical for employees. We have to pay for retirement. All of those kinds of costs are in there. They're part of contracts that we've negotiated with our employees. There are no options for reductions. And so we've been facing every year a rather substantial increase. That 8% is a little bit more than last year. We're not sure what's going to happen next year, but that could additionally increase. So we have this continuing budget problem, and the difficulty is that we are unable to balance that budget without some additional revenues or some cuts in services. So to put that expense in a little bit different format, this is the pie chart that shows that. You can see education is the largest expense. After that comes the non-discretionary other that I was talking about with the list of what that involves. Human services, that's the things like the senior center and the VA expenses that we have. The public works, of course, is the DPW, snow plowing, and trash. And the parks and cultural would be the library and the parks system. All right. No, didn't want to do it. There we go. All right. So the key reasons, coming right back to what I was talking about, the schools have depended on state funding. That's been flat. So even though they've held their increase to a relatively small amount, it's still been very difficult for them without additional state funding. Contractual obligations, I talked about the fact that we have just concluded contracts with virtually all of our town employees, and we have requirements there. That other category, that non-discretionary spending that we have for insurance and retirement costs. Fire department restructuring, I talked about. Trash, we'll talk about later, but we're in the process of doing something new with the trash contract. One-time funds, Chris talked about that. They're over, they finished, and new growth is not promising, it's not likely to provide us with very much. Okay, so last year we came to the town and we asked for about $4 million of an override, which we said would hold us for about 5 years. It would cover everything we thought expense increases that we would see both for the schools and for the town for 5 years. That override failed. It didn't do very well at all. And we kind of got out of that the voters really didn't want to commit that kind of money for that period of time, and that they would prefer that we looked at it year by year, and that's what we're doing this year. We're looking at this year and this year only, and we're talking about what we need to balance the budget for the coming year, the coming FY26, which starts on July 1st. And that's the override situation that we're looking at this moment. So you, the voters, have spoken, and so now we're looking at what our alternatives are. And Ray is going to get up here and discuss those.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, so at town meeting, you're going to be looking at two budget options that are going to be presented. Proposition A is a 2.5 override to balance the budget. That's to the tune of $725,000, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. And budget B is a service and budget cut approach, where there's a number of departmental reductions, so small reductions in services, and the elimination of our current trash service. And we'll definitely be talking about that in more detail. So whenever you present a budget at town meeting, you'll typically get a lot of questions. Well, did you consider X? And X depends on what your approach to life in town is, what you think is something that is a valuable asset, things you think are less valuable. So proactively, we wanted to take a look at what are the other options. And we looked at all of the budget line items in town government that were large enough to make a consequential contribution to reduction in expense. So we could use one-time funds. We could use stabilization fund, free cash, things like that. Truly a poor fiscal process. We probably have enough to cover the shortfall this year, but it would drain all of our resources, and it is likely to impact our bond rating, so it'll cost us more to borrow money. And if there are unplanned expenses that come up, it will seriously limit our ability to cover those. We looked at schools. They're nominally half of the budget. Could the schools afford $725,000 cut? And the reality is that would have a massive impact on the education process, and the schools are one of the highest contributors to valuation of properties in town. So we didn't want to have that kind of reputation. And the schools had already done due diligence. They cut over $500,000 from their budget in the form of the 9 teachers that Pete referenced. So we didn't feel that was a viable option to approach. We could have shuttered the senior center and the library. Together, it's close to the $725,000. So what does that mean? Well, no library. We would lose certification. It would mean you wouldn't be able to borrow books from anywhere. The revenues that the library collects would go away. And we still have to heat the buildings, and we still have to have insurance on buildings. Those heating and insurance together are probably $200,000. So there's kind of a false economy of scale there if we were to consider doing that. We'd still have to come up with another couple $100,000 in cuts to make that work. And it impacts a substantial portion of town as far as people that use the library and the senior center. We could increase trash bag fees. We've had extensive discussions with the SWAT team as to, is that possible? Could we generate enough revenue by increasing trash bag fees? And we looked at tripling the cost of bags. And right now, our bag revenue is about $250,000 a year. So if we tripled that, we'd have almost $650,000 in revenue. But there's a little false economy of scale there for anyone that was paying attention. When the last time we increased bag fees, everybody ran out to Stop and Shop and bought every bag on the counter. So you've got a little bit of a blip in revenue, but that would probably reduce the amount of revenue from that one line item in the FY26 budget by about 40%. So again, now we have 40% of the $725K we got to find an alternate source for. And it impacts everybody. We also took a look at public safety. As obvious it would seem that we should not cancel a shift to public safety, we looked at it anyways, just to see if it's possible. So if you are willing to accept the profound safety risk of canceling a shift and increased insurance costs, and just to give you a sense, third shift, they took a look over, well, not over, nearly 2,000 calls occurred on third shift. So that's pretty substantial exposure to all of our citizens. It would reduce ambulance revenue. So again, not something we saw as a viable option. And there aren't that many line items for us to explore. So the one last item we looked at that's not on this chart is we looked at more aggressive cuts in each of the departments. Only so many departments have a large enough budget that you would have a consequential contribution to cost reduction. So we'd be talking pretty consequential cuts to staff hours, open hours for town hall offices, library, et cetera. That did not seem to be in the best interest of town either. So the two options that are on the table, either the override or the service cuts, are really what we have. So to take a look at those in more detail, a Prop 2.5 override, again, you heard the number, we'd be looking for $725,000. It would be assessed to your property taxes, and we'll see in the next slide how much that comes to. It doesn't correct the structural operating deficit. It takes care of this year for now. If we pass this or we don't pass this, we will have, very likely, an override request for next year as well. But town meeting spoke, said let's do this 1 year at a time, so that's what we're doing. And the school staff layoffs right now, the 9 teachers that were let go, is part of this baseline number. So that would not change. But we'd continue to have weekly trash pickup. We had very limited service cuts, and we'll deal with the real structural deficit sometime in the future. So what's it going to cost you? So you see the table here. An average home in West Boylston is $518,000 valuation, would be $239 cost to the average home for this override. So the other option is taking a look at additional budget cuts. So these fall into 2 categories. One is additional cuts to town services, and the other portion of this, which is in the next slide, would be defund trash pickup. On the budget cut side, we'd be looking at moving a police cruiser that was slated to be replaced this year to next year, reducing the number of fire department shifts, modest amount, but you might see an impact in response time, which could be material. There's additional school cuts in there, $42,000. The library, 17,000. Veteran Services, 10,000. Senior Center, 4,000. Reduce the overlay allowance by 25K, and reductions in parks and field maintenance. So everybody would feel some pain from that portion. And everybody would also feel pain from defunding the trash. So if we take a look at the numbers, the trash contract being contemplated for FY26 is $652,000. But if we eliminate that, we also eliminate the revenue from bags, which is roughly $215,000. So this portion provides about $437,000 in additional budget cuts. So this is being presented as one of the two budget options that town administrators placing on the ballot, largely because it is the simplest option. There are no layoffs involved. We don't have any staffing issues to deal with, no unemployment insurance, et cetera. And there's minimal impact to other town departments. So it's a very neat item to cut from the budget. But overall, it's going to increase the individual home's cost for trash pickup. The SWAT team has looked at this in some detail. Their best estimate for what it would cost you for trash pickup to hire a private contractor would be around $800 a year. So right now it's about $250. Doesn't make financial sense for individual homeowners. It does also require the engagement of by every home of a trash hauler. And the format that $800 would cover would be weekly trash pickup and biweekly recycling pickup. So you get a little less service for a lot more cost. Again, that's not something the Finance Committee would favor. And I think as a citizen of town, I certainly don't want to pay 3 times as much for the same thing, or something even less. Okay, so next up, we have Mary Foley. She'll cover the rest of the slides, and after Mary's done, we'll open it up to Q&A. So again, please come to the mic with whatever questions you have. Hopefully you're taking a lot of notes on questions.
So basically, we're presenting 2 budgets at the town meeting. The first budget is Prop 2.5 override. If that passes, we keep our trash and we maintain services. If it does, then we have to propose budget B. B is if the override, people don't want the override, then we're going to have our own individual trash pickup and we'll have other cuts to the budget. So that's basically the bottom line. We have to put 2 ballot questions on the town meeting agenda because we have to have a budget. If both of these fail, then we have to have a new town meeting and come up with a whole, start from scratch and have a whole new budget. So that's the reason for the two town budgets that are going to be voted on at the town meeting. If the 2.5 operational override passes at the town meeting, there'll be a ballot question in June 3rd, I believe. We need to have passing votes at that ballot that go along with the town meeting. If the override doesn't pass this year, it will be necessary to consider again next year, and there'll be more overrides and more cuts. Okay.
Before we move on, Mayor,
Yes.
just one thing on this slide that I think is important. These 2 options will be on the warrant, on the town meeting warrant, and I think that it's really critical that we emphasize that at the very least, both of them be passed. I mean, I strongly encourage the passage of both options just to prevent the third that Mary talked about, having to reconvene a town meeting before July 1, because July 1 is the beginning of the fiscal year, and if we don't have a budget, we can't operate. So I just think that's really, I just want to stress that.
Just use the pad.
Okay, thank you. So the other considerations we have, the potential for operational overrides are not the only long-term challenges. There's potential for debt exclusion overrides in the future that may fund many of our unaddressed capital needs, of the town, potential larger projects we've been looking at, school building updates, DPW fire department facilities, ADA compliance, and funding of trash receptacles. So what about next year? The override being proposed this year is a Band-Aid. It's just a Band-Aid. With the underlying issues, the expenses and the growth outpacing the revenue, along with the pre-existing structural deficit, we do anticipate another override. The funds we have, the limited taxation we have, the lack of growth, there's just no way for us to raise revenue to keep up with the current expenses that are going. And so many of the expenses are totally out of our hands. And we live in a really nice town, and we have beautiful services, and it would be very sad to see our services cut and see things go downhill in town. So it's a Band-Aid. It'll be a Band-Aid next year unless things change and there's more funding or whatever, but none of us can anticipate that, so we don't really know. Okay, all numbers for the expenses and revenues are preliminary, both within West Boylston and with the state. We don't know when there's going to be more cuts. We don't know if there's going to be more revenues. It's all unknown. This doesn't account for any potential state cuts due to both mass and federal budget uncertainty. Okay, after assessing all available options and considering what is the short and long-term interest of residents, we recommend that the town pursue the override to preserve our current service levels. All right, we're going to open up the floor to any questions.
My name's Charlie Harney. I live at 159 Angelbrook Drive. We have 132 residents. I pay over $7,000 a year in taxes. We get no services from the town. The only services are the trash pickup. So I find it interesting that the simplest answer is to drop the trash. So if I take 132 times $7,000, that's $1 million a year we give to the town with no services other than the trash. And to think you took the simple answer to solve your budget problem is disappointing. Hillside Village got 112 units. I don't know if anybody's here from Hillside. They probably pay, I would assume, their values are similar to ours. They're probably paying another $1 million as well. That's also a senior citizen community. To think you're getting $2 million of tax revenue from us with basically no services, and the simple service we do get, you're going to delete it, is very disappointing. I really suggest you look at other alternatives because I think trash is important.
I agree with you, trash is important, but senior citizens also have the senior center, the library. They have other services that are provided by the town, the parks, and fire, DPW, police. I mean, there's many, many other services other than just town.
And the other
trash.
thing I find interesting is that all the towns around are blaming reduction in COVID money. COVID's been over for a couple of years. So the towns ought to look at what their structure was pre-COVID, because the COVID money was short-term money. And unfortunately, I think the towns built up their administration and structure so that the ongoing costs were going to be elevated from what they were before. So perhaps the Finance Committee could look at how they get back to more of a pre-COVID administration, which the property taxes used to fund.
We have looked at that, and the biggest problem we have is the things with the insurance and the retirement. Those funds are out of our control. There's a committee that has looked into insurance. They look for the best policies. They do a lot of research. They really research it so we get the best available deal for our town employees. And we have to provide that, and we have to provide into retirement. It's just the way it is, and
Yeah.
it's non-negotiable.
Well, the only thing I'd request is instead of taking the simple answer, perhaps you go back and look at the structure. Maybe there are other options.
The
than just
structure
delete-
really hasn't grown.
Pardon me?
The structure hasn't grown since COVID.
So the COVID money, you didn't elevate your administration with the
No.
COVID money?
The
Really?
COVID money was to cover expenses of having buildings closed, having the schools still running.
Did you add more administrative people to the school system?
No,
You
not
didn't.
that, well, I take that back. Mr. Pedoni, could you answer that?
You did.
Thank you.
I'm very surprised at that.
Well, Mr. Pedoni's from the school committee, so,
If I could just add to that. if you take a look at the town structurally, we've got two large sources of expense increase. One is the non-negotiables, as we talked about. It's at 8% or nominally about $650,000 of increase. It's going to be something like that next year, in all likelihood. And for individuals, I think you probably know your own insurance goes up 10, 15% a year. We got retirement assessments we don't have control over. So that's, call it $650,000. We have roughly $16 million in salaries in town, across all departments. The average increase in salaries is right around 3.5%. So those two items together total something like 1.1 million per year in increased expenses versus Prop 2.5, which is going to give us something on the order of $500,000 of additional revenue. So right there is a $600,000 to $700,000 structural shortfall, and that's ignoring things like salt for the roads and you know the increase in expenses and supplies. So we can look at other options, but the situation isn't really going to change. The town administration has not increased. The school administration has not increased. So there are no simple choices,
Yeah.
but
Could you put up that slide that has the school costs, what they were 2025 versus 20? Do you have 2020? Do you have pre-COVID school numbers versus current numbers for school system?
not in the slide deck.
Well, see, I think that, with respect to his comment, I think it'd be interesting to look at the school expenses pre-COVID, look at the school expenses now, and see, because I have to believe that in the school systems, they built up their administrative costs using COVID money, and that's still in the base, which is going to continue to increase. But I think it'd be important to look at the school system expenses pre-COVID to what they are today, and where the COVID money went to.
Well, a welcome input from the school committee chair if he wishes to do that. I will say that this number is not the entire school budget. That this is, and Jim, you can probably talk to it better than I can, but this just represents the component that the town contributes to the school budget.
Correct, right. So this number is just the town number. We have other funding sources from using school choice money, using circuit breaker money, and other funding that supplements this budget as well. We did not increase our administrative costs. We didn't add any administrators during COVID. The budget, I think, do you remember? I know that the number that was used for last year's override presentation for the school was an average of 2.86 over the last 10 years. So that's the only number that's changed through the last 10 years from the schools. So the money that was used from ESSER and other COVID money was to supplement certain services that were lacking because students had, lost services. So it was kind of to try to bring them back up to level funding. That money is now gone. So that money, once it disappeared, those services disappeared as well. So this is as cut and dry as it can be. We didn't add administrators, we didn't add anything. We used that money where it was needed to try to provide additional services to those students that needed it.
Okay, so your total head count, you're saying is basically flat?
Yes. Well, -9 after this year.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would add, it's an excellent question, and we should question where these monies go, but financial fundamentals, you don't use one-time revenues to cover ongoing operating costs.
That's basically where I'm going.
And, the Finance Committee, and in our role as an independent opinion body, if they brought to us, okay, let's fund these operating expenses based on these one-time monies from COVID, we would have pushed back really hard. But the administrator is also well-versed and wouldn't typically bring that to us.
No, that's basically the point of COVID, is that I know all the towns are saying they've lost the COVID money, but they shouldn't have increased their structure knowing we were short-term money, recognizing that down the road, those expenses are going to continue to inflate, which only increased our tax base.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Denise Nephew on Cavour Circle. On one of your slides, you said like some monies came from hotel costs, Is there any way of attracting more businesses like a hotel to town? Because I think Hojo's is the last thing that rents rooms. But also, this building here, this room, would make a very nice wedding venue. And I've never noticed that the senior center has actually rented out space to generate some income. So is there any kinds of plans or information that could increase more business coming to town?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking it. I know through some of the more recent actions, they are looking to gain revenue from the space, to be booking it for events and programs later into the day, in the evening and weekends, for a fee. But at this point, I would actually invite our town administrator to come up and speak for a moment. She has some plans that I think are very interesting as it applies to the handling of trash in the future. And she can maybe give you a little bit of background on the groups within town that are here seeking to increase our revenue base. So, Heather?
That might be stretching.
You can introduce them. I didn't say you'd outline specifics.
Would you bring the slide back, please, to the other options? And hi, everybody. My name's Heather Butler. I'm your new town administrator. I began working here on April 14th. It has been a whirlwind, to say the very least, of coming up to speed on all of this. I can assure you that you have an incredibly hardworking select board, finance committee. SWAT has just been absolutely so informative and beneficial to me as I've sort of tried to grapple with this issue. And what I would like to share with you is there's no magic bullet. There's no easy fix to this, and I don't want anyone to think that that's what this is. But it's a suggestion. It's, I think, something that we could work on as a community, and it might make it so that, because the one thing I keep hearing from everybody is, why are you focusing on the trash? Why are you picking on this one service? It's the one well, I don't want to say it's the one visible service, but I think somebody said earlier that it's your only service that you get from the town. And I would beg to differ, because you do have a fantastic senior center building. You have an amazing library. I've been there multiple times. Every time I walk in there, I'm just amazed at how many people are there enjoying the programs. Your schools are great. There's no better economic driver for your community, to the point about the hotels and finding other sources of revenues. Having great schools, that's what makes that happen. Having schools that people go, ugh, heard things aren't going well, they just cut a bunch of teachers. That does not speak well to your community and your economic magnetism. Again, libraries, senior centers, schools, those are the things that make your community unique and special, and it's clear that you take really good care of the buildings that you have, and that's to reduce the services to those buildings, to cut staff, to cut hours. It doesn't do your community any good. But neither does taking away your trash, right? I get that. So one of the first things I did was meet with Norma, and if you haven't met Norma, she is your SWAT chair, and she is a force. She has negotiated, if you ever need contracts negotiated, I would recommend that you tap into her abilities, because she ran a pretty mean deal with your trash collection vendor. I met with the vendor. He showed me iteration after iteration after iteration of spreadsheet where she just wore them down. So we know that the contract that is on the table is a good contract. It is something I'd love to sign tomorrow. The problem is that without an appropriation, I legally cannot sign a contract to preserve the trash. So I called DEP, talked to your community representative about, can you point me in the direction of other towns that are funding their trash in their operation budget through taxation, so that I can call them and find out how the heck they're pulling it off. She couldn't come back with a single town. Everybody does it through what we call an enterprise fund. An enterprise fund is like your light bill, like your water sewer. It is outside of your tax, it's outside of your general budget, which means two things. One is you're never gonna go to a town meeting and have someone threaten to try to take away your lights, right? Because it's a protected infrastructure program that is funded by you, the ratepayers. It is self-sustaining, it is long-lasting, and it is untouchable by things like overrides and the town plain old running out of money, which we've done. We've just run out of money. So the thought process is to take trash out of the operational budget, stop making it a political football, stop making it so that every time that we get here, every 5 years, we come back to you and say, come and vote for an override, or we're gonna take away your trash. You know, that's not really, because you're gonna get really mad, right? If you think you're mad now, wait till we do it again. So the thought process is create an enterprise, take it out of your operation, treat it like we do your light bill, your water sewer bill. And one of the benefits of that is that it will also free up some money in your operational budget, which we will quickly backfill. I mean, make no mistake. That is not really, again, I'm not here with any good news, because I'm going to ask you to support the override, which is a 2.5% increase. Then I'm going to bill you separately for your trash, and then I'm going to come back next year and ask for another override. Cannot sugarcoat that, cannot speak any more plainly about that. But next year's number will be different if we can take trash out of there. And again, we're making it so that we can never come back and hang it over your head. So, why is it necessary to do this override if this is the plan? I started April 12th. It is now, I don't know, I don't know what day it is. It's May 8th. It's May 8th. We have a town meeting in a week and a half. There's just no way that there's enough days on that calendar for me to, in a thoughtful, you know, I just can't do it. I can't do it before town meeting. So I also can't do it after town meeting if I don't have the appropriation to do it. So I'm gonna borrow some credit. I'm gonna ask for credit. I'm gonna ask that you consider, and I know that I'm not gonna get a bunch of yeses, but if I even got a handful of yeses, that you voted for the override, you supported the concept that we can make it so that at least trash comes off the table. And by Norma and myself and Julianne and the Finance Committee and the Select Board, time to put together this enterprise option. It'd be run very similar to that of Holden. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Holden's a bigger community. They can spread it out a little bit more, so please don't look at their pricing because I don't know that I can match that. But we can certainly look at ways to supplement, at least in the first couple of years, with the carts. You know, maybe there's some creative financing we can do to sort of keep your costs as low as possible. That's kind of all I have to offer. Welcome questions. I went through that real fast. I was definitely more on target at the 1:30, but it's late and losing focus.
Hey, my name's David Ashwell, 139 Woodland. There's a couple of questions I was trying to, around the trash particularly, that I was trying to understand. So when does our current contract expire?
June 15th,
End of June.
end of June, yeah.
Okay. The contract that we're proposing to sign, but should we get the override? With whatever trash company that will be going forward, is that for a 1-year agreement?
It is a 5-year agreement. The pricing is based on a 5-year commitment.
Okay. But in this case, we would technically only have funds specifically set aside to how we're currently proposing the budget to pay for the first year.
Correct.
Okay. And then going forward, you would like to essentially shuffle the numbers around, so then as trash becomes its own reoccurring rate payer like item, like everything else. Okay. And then at that point in time, we wouldn't have to ask for an override on a yearly basis. Trash would just cover itself for at least for those I shouldn't say never for an override, but through the lens of trash, what we pay then at that point on like a monthly out-of-pocket expense would then cover trash for the remaining 4 years in theory of a contract. Is that?
Correct. It would cover it into perpetuity, because just like your light bill, just like your water sewer, we build it as infrastructure, and that unless you as residents decided unilaterally that you no longer wanted to have that service available to you, it would be available.
Okay.
So just to sort of clarify the question about future overrides, again, I am not promising
No,
that we're not coming back for another
I fully
override.
understand.
I just won't come back for an override where I'm
For-
saying,
Through the lens of trash.
yeah, where I'm holding trash as the carrot.
Yeah, if I might just chime in here for a moment. The current operational plan would be, if the override is successful, then Heather would have basically 6 months to put together the mechanics and necessary support for an article in the fall, at which they would try to set up the sewer and the waste enterprise fund. And it would be an independent rate setting group. Their contract calls right now for a 5% per year increase. So whatever operational increases are required to make that enterprise self-sustained is what you would be charged.
Okay.
Ray, maybe we can say the other side of that, if the override fails, Heather will not be able to sign the trash contract, and we will be really stuck for the foreseeable future, including trying to move to enterprise.
That's absolutely correct.
And then I had a question specifically around Prop A versus Prop B. So the Finance Committee would prefer, if I understand correctly, that both propositions are verbally approved at the town meeting, simply to get them both on the ballot. And then for my own question related to that, once they're on the ballot June 3rd, will it be essentially choose A or choose B, or is there?
Now,
Sorry,
If I can
please
clarify.
correct,
So-
yes, thank you.
let's take the scenario. You're for the override or you're not for the override.
Sure.
If you're for the override, at town meeting, you should vote both for the override article and the budget cut article. And then when it comes to the ballot, you would vote for the override. If the ballot question fails, it would revert to the other budget, the service cut budget,
The Prop B option.
Prop B.
Okay.
Provided that passes. Provided that part passes. If you are against the override, you would vote no to option A, vote yes option B, and then the ballot question is then moot, but you could still vote no if you feel good.
Okay.
If everything fails, it's a real problem. It's, I think the trash contract expires June 25th, if I remember correctly. We would have no time to reconvene another town meeting and to present a separate budget. So that really puts us in never land, if that is the case.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other trash-related questions? Otherwise, I'm gonna sneak back to the back of the room.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah. In 1991, we had override.
If you could come to the microphone, we can't hear you.
Where's our town meeting report? This is my big moment. I'm ready for this.
Okay. We had a trash override. Gary Peterson, Prospect Street.
Hi, Gary.
How are you?
Well, thank you.
Welcome to town.
Thank you, I appreciate that. All right,
Hate to put you in this
No,
mess
it's
right off the
okay.
bat. It only gets better.
I'm ready.
Wait till the town meeting. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my goodness.
And Ray, I hope you give that presentation to make it very plain and simple to the town meeting voters what they're voting on. Because in many cases, I know I've been at them, and numerous people around me don't know what they're really headed into or what they're voting for, and that was very good. I appreciate it. 1991, trash override, 200,000 dollars.
230.
Grown to 4 whatever. What happens to that money?
Okay. What, Greg, you want me to take it?
Go ahead. Oh, I kind of know the answer,
Okay.
but I want to hear
Okay,
it from you.
So, when you pass a Proposition 2.5 override, regardless of what bill of goods the town sells you at the time,
Yep,
right?
yep,
That money is only used for that purpose that first year.
okay,
Every year after, that money is still raised and becomes the general fund,
okay,
for which we continue to fund theoretically until 2025 when Heather shows up. You continue to fund trash in this particular case,
Right.
right?
but when trash goes, it goes into the general fund.
Right, so that money is part of the much larger sum of money. There is no, there's a, maybe a misconception or a theory that original $200,000 was put into a fund specific for trash.
Correct.
That never actually happens.
No.
It just becomes, and I hate to break the bubble on that, if that's, I'm sorry, but it's a truth. So
So,
that money becomes part of the $30 million that is available for expenditures on all of the things.
okay, very good.
Yeah.
I kind of figured that.
Yeah,
Done.
there would be no way, because obviously the $200,000 that was appropriated in, 1992, the cost of that trash has escalated,
Oh.
and so,
I'm sure it has,
You know.
but that 400,000, if it went as an underride back to the taxpayers, that would help them to pay for their own private contractor to pick up their
except for the
trash.
fact that if you take the $200,000, if you ask for an underride for that $200,000, I'm gonna go back in and find another $200,000, because you're gonna take it away from me.
Okay.
So, please don't.
You never know.
I'm just saying, I'm just saying.
I'm not a mean guy personally,
You started off on such a happy note.
and it'll continue, I'm sure.
I'm sure it will. So the reality is that even though I've only been here a handful of weeks,
Yeah.
and it seems like months, I've met with all the department heads, I've gone through their budgets, and it is tedious, but I felt it was important to make sure that if I was gonna stand up here, that I truly did know that there really wasn't a secret stash, you know, and
Correct.
it really isn't.
No, I
It's-
don't
it's-
doubt that there isn't,
You
but
have a very well-run town, you have great staff who work very hard every day, and they're not, one of the things that happens in a small.
maybe if you cut their salary,
I
we'd
know.
have all that.
I will say that in a smaller town, there's so much less discretion, right? Because all of your services, not all of them, the vast majority of your services are contracted out. You know, our accounting software service, for example, right? We don't have a team of accountants downstairs doing the work of keeping all of your money safe. We have 1 3/4 people. So we rely on a contracted service to do all of those things. That contracted service is a fixed rate that the vendor tells us every year, this is how much that costs. And that is, because we're a small community and we have a limited staff, that is throughout the entire town. So these vendors will call us and say, this is what the service costs. That number goes into the budget. And that's really, besides toner and pens, that's really the budget. Anyway, Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. The other question I had, well, for everybody, maybe you too, but I think you've got a long way to go. This is relatively small. I mean, trash pickup, we're getting upset at trash pickup. We did about the dog leash. We did, little things like that. Has anybody given thought, and I'm sure you have, to regionalizing all services? School, fire, police. Can't we do that? Do we need 3 or 4 fire chiefs, 3 or 4 police chiefs, 3 or 4 superintendents for surrounding towns? Do we all need our own little department? Or can't we, when a large company comes in and takes over another bank, a banking company, a lot of people lose their jobs. It's a bad thing for those folks that lose their jobs, but they become highly efficient. They become more profitable. The town itself, see, we can't afford all these little things. We can't afford our own. Can't we regionalize? Is there something on a state and federal level that is going to help to regionalize this?
Well, you're preaching to the choir, without doubt.
Well, let's get
Any
going. Let's
opportunity
start
that
singing.
we've seen, we've tried to pursue. Right now, we do have regional communications for police and fire. We have a shared building inspector.
Well,
We're going down that
And,
pathway.
I know the animal inspector, he came by the house the other day. I know you're doing it, but there's so much more as far as fire, police. I mean, those are the big ones. And schools. We've missed the boat with Boylston, Berlin when I was a little kid. We missed the boat. I've been here a long time.
Yeah, now, we revisited the Boylston scenario
Yeah.
when they were in the process of building the school. That didn't work out. I don't know if our
No,
school chair board would like to comment on that.
Years ago, Sterling. I mean, there were loads of different options, connecting with Wachusett, but I just,
So let me offer this
we're gonna be doing
caveat.
this every year at least,
I know, well,
for pennies.
so let me give you the caveat. As I was just saying about the accounting software, right? When you enter into a regional agreement, unless you are the lead community, you are given an assessment by the lead community for that service every year. And if you're not the lead community, you do not have input all the time into what that assessment is.
Let's be the lead community.
Well, yeah, but there's a cost to that also, right? Because now you are the infrastructure for all of these regional assessments. And the only reason I say this is because I'm coming from a very small town, way out west, up on the Mohawk Trail, where we had everything regionalized, very few local departments. The number one frustration, and the reason why we just passed an override last year in little tiny Buckland, was because we could no longer manage the assessment. Because the assessments come in, and we have no ability to push back on them. It's just a number that goes into the budget. And our revenues are even worse than yours. And the reality is they become it's a be careful what you wish for. And the police services, when I had a police department in the town, it was $192,000 a year to run that police department. When we joined and merged services with the town of Shelburne to be able to, and I keep saying we, I'm sorry, it's only been a couple of weeks, when they were merged services, that assessment number jumped to $494,000 a year to merge and regionalize police services. So I'm all in favor of pursuing those conversations, but I just caution you that regional services are not the cost savings that you always think that they are. So, and I just, I'd be hesitant to regionalize everything, simply because then we lose control.
It just seems.
At least here, we can cut stuff. If you get a regional agreement, you're just paying or you're out of the agreement, and sometimes then you can't get out of the agreement because it's a multi-year.
If I could, we had a dispatch surprise this year. We regionalized dispatch, and it is assessed to us from Holton, and as I remember, it doubled, right?
Yeah.
And we had no idea why.
Yeah, you have no
And we
idea.
asked why, we said, you gotta find out why, to the police chief, and he has tried to investigate it, but it's difficult to find out.
And that's a solid number that you can't come back on,
Right.
right?
So,
Gary, I think we do look at that too. We've had conversations with every department as the years go by. And we looked at, again, grateful for what happened with communications because it does take a load off the town from that standpoint. But I will share with you, there was an article put out by the Worcester Research Bureau back in January about overrides. And I'm just looking through, and one of the pages I just plopped out was Paxton, from 2014 to 2018, had an override every year for education. Didn't pass every year, but that's obviously the 2.5% was not sufficient to fund what they were assessed from that school. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I mean, I'm saying that I know regionalization also brings a lot of good things. I mean, it brings a bigger school system, brings more programs, so on and so forth. But there's a cost to it as well. But I think that that's something we have to look at. We also have to look at union, different union agreements with different public safety groups. I know they're all integrating that, but it's not something we have not taken into
Well,
consideration.
and again, we're not the only town facing this. All of our local towns are too, so.
As opportunities come
I'd
up.
just like to sit down with everybody, hey, let's work out a deal, and this is it, and have it done. I come in a very simple way.
Yeah,
and
I know.
I
You
know it's
want
much
an,
more
you want an
complex.
internship in the town administrator's office?
No, thank you.
Sure? I can't pay you.
I'll bring you
Boy,
coffee, but that's about it.
Well, I know, but maybe we could sit down and we could work on some of this stuff. Any other trash questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't have a trash question, but I want to lead on that. So regional, Christina
I
Pedoni.
feel like I'm getting
Um,
set up here.
No, this is a good question. I hear a lot about regionalization across the board, and everyone's like, it's great, and then I'm like, look at the towns around us that are suffocating because of it. We've regionalized a few things, and I was gonna bring up police, because there's a belief that if you go in with someone else, it's this massive cost savings. And for every community around us, if you're educated and watching, they're seeing sometimes double or triple, and it's burying their town. Last town meeting, we had 3 people stand up and argue about animal, argue about building inspector, and then argue for regionalization. Could you just give us, maybe not you, maybe I'm gonna give you a break, maybe one of you, we've done the regionalization, we've tried to do it, there were some select board members forcing regionalization because there was a belief that it was cheaper, because we couldn't fill part-time jobs and that. Do you have any of those numbers of how much that has actually caused the town to increase? I know fire, police, you said one, but
I think
the other two?
we can speak uniformly here, no, we haven't looked at the numbers. The reality is, any of those regionalization agreements are very individualistic. So you'd have to literally assess them one by one to see if they're valid. There's some opportunities we'll presumably be looking at in the near future. Will they work out? You've heard from 2 people now that it's not all roses. There are some thorns in there too. So, yeah, it's something I'm sure as a town we'll keep looking at as the possibilities crop up. But obviously no promises because we don't know if it's really in our best interest.
Uh-oh.
And I think part of the regionalization too, I think from the animal control officer, while the cost might be higher, it's also providing us with some more, with services that we were not being provided with before under our in-town person, and as far as like, if there is an animal that needs to be housed, we didn't have that capability, and I think that this provides that. So trying to figure out what that cost is, it might be considerable, but by the same token, it is providing a service that we need to have.
But that in and of itself is an interesting agreement. It's sharing a person. There's controls there. It's 2 towns. It's not a big bureaucracy that's driving it. It functionally works for both towns. And the same is true for a building inspector. Small scale is great. We could save money in theory for things that are very capital intensive, but those are much more complicated. You've got host communities, but you also have control issues. who controls what purchases, who controls what personnel, who controls scheduling. It just gets so complicated. So always worth looking at, not necessarily a good idea.
One more question for you, Denise, if you voice her. When are we going to pay off like the senior center, the police department, the town hall? How many more years of that paying?
2038.
2030 for all of them?
Well, so
Yeah, they're
if you
20-year
add,
bonds.
yeah, if you add new debt between now and then, that number will change. Your current debt schedule has you free and clear in 2038.
There's several projects involved in that. There's the police station is still
Yeah.
on there. There's some other, but they're all staggered as to when they started 20 years out. I mean, so that's it. So they all end at different times as well. But the good news is those have been paying down, I guess, from the standpoint of fiscal prowess, I guess, for lack of a better term. We're not overburdened in debt at this time, so that's the good news. And the debt that we
really
have is at very reasonable rates. So the cost of our debt is not as high as it is for other communities.
And the net for the library will be up much sooner than that. I'm guessing probably have maybe 8 or 10 years left on that debt. But it's just, and it's a small piece of a larger pie.
You mentioned the increase in public safety at about 13.4%, largely driven by the fire department. I'm sure that it's been investigated when you considered switching from a call fire department to a full-time. What would the cost be for privatization of the ambulance services, especially driven by cost of training, personnel, the ambulance itself, gas, reimbursement, administrative fees, all those things? Was that investigated, the privatization of the ambulance service?
Well, the finance committee itself didn't conduct that investigation, but I believe the prior, maybe 2 town administrators ago, they took a look at that. I don't have a black and white answer for you, sorry. Does anyone else?
Just to add to that, one of the problems with losing the call-out firemen is that in order for the firemen to arrive at a fire and to actually enter the house and do something, under the NFPA safety regulations, there have to be 4 firefighters on site. So if we have 2 firefighters at the station and they drive the fire truck to the house, they can't do anything until 2 more firefighters arrive. We used to do that with call-out. And now we're basically saying we need 4 firefighters on duty at all times. The previous chief made that work with 2 firefighters. The new chief came on and said, I just can't find, it's over. Call-out firefighters is over. We have got to go forward. And we started that, not this year, but the year before, because we didn't want to add a lot of firefighters very quickly. So we're trying to get the fire department up to having 4 firefighters. There are also EMTs, and they also go out on ambulance calls. So they could be, 2 could be off on an ambulance, and we still are down into 2 firefighters. It's a complicated and safety issue. We can obviously call mutual aid from Holden. We can call, I saw the fire truck from Clinton go by my house last week, called out on mutual aid. But it does take some time for them to get here and to help.
The other thing is, the call-out fire department that we had, the age of those firefighters has risen, and there's a lot that can be over 65. So it's not really a choice that we're no longer using them. It's that they've aged out, and there's no one really interested in that position anymore.
So I'm not advocating for going back to a call fire department. So if you contracted, let's say, with Marlboro Hudson, AMR, another entity, a private entity, then you have 2 that are manning the ambulance. You have 2 firefighters that are full-time. And then I don't know if that mitigates cost by privatization of the ambulance solely the ambulance service. I don't know if that can be explored or revisited.
We can certainly revisit it. I guess the complexity with that is, we would also lose revenue. Right now, the ambulance is a source of revenue for us. I mean, it brings in about, what's 600, I'm trying to think what
I think that all of our ambulances are paid by the revenues from the ambulance receipts. So that piece is cost neutral. The cost of the actual employees, it probably is a positive balance impact, but they also help staff the fire engines. So as it's been said, it's a very complicated set of factors. I have no fundamental objection to looking at it again, but it's not as simple as just hiring out the ambulance service.
Some other community, Worcester, I know, has had some challenges with, they rely on private as well as their own, and they've had some challenges getting with response times. So that's the one benefit of local ambulance services, better response times, but we can certainly look into it.
On the NFPA recommendations, we had an issue in Angelbrook this year, and what I was told was that the NFPA regulations are recommendations. So maybe we look at the state laws, because the state laws may be different. If the former fire chief only had 2 firefighters and the new fire chief wants 4, he may be relying upon the recommendations of the NFPA, but that may not be what's legally required. So that might be something to look at. Maybe you can only do the 2 per state law, but maybe that should be looked at.
The old fire chief also had the on-call firefighters.
Okay, all I'm suggesting is you ought to take a look at the NFPA recommendation versus the state law requirements. That's all I'm asking. That's something to look at.
Thank you.
Okay, it sounds like we've run the gambit tonight for questions, so I wanted to thank you all again for coming tonight and appreciate
Can I
the.
just make one statement? I was waiting for everybody to finish.
Okay, sorry.
In regards to the schools. Thank you. I'm gonna turn so we can look at everybody. First, a couple things. The schools also have mandates that we have to, provide a certain level of education for students. 1/3 of our total budget is special education. A piece of that is out of district placements, which in many cases we cannot control. FY25 increase that was governed by the state was 14%, and we had nothing to say about it, so we had to deal with it. Our special education director has done an extraordinary job trying to bring more programs into the school system to keep a lot of these kids here, and we've saved a lot of money doing that. So that's one piece of it. As far as the regionalization, I know that, people think that we only need one superintendent. Well, a lot of these regionals have assistant superintendents, so it's not as clear, cut and dry. It probably would provide additional programs and things like that. But, those are all subject to look into, and we definitely should investigate those things. The main reason I wanted to kind of address the public here is I just want to put things in perspective, and I'm going to use some very, very rough numbers. Currently, the rough average cost based on total number of pupils this year and our total school budget costs around $15,000 per student cost. I pay around $7,000 in taxes. I'm a loss with 1 kid. I have 2 kids in the school. Every one of us who've ever had 1 child in the school is a loss from year to year to year to year. So I think it's important to understand that everybody looks to cut at the school because it's the biggest number and we think that's the easiest place. But there's a lot of rules and regulations that we have to follow to maintain our budget. And we need to understand that, I know there's seniors in here and they may have moved from a different town, not lived there their whole lives, maybe never put kids through the school system. But for those of us who have, and if you have kids, you probably put them through a school system somewhere else. I think we need to understand that it's really our responsibility to continue to educate kids, even once ours are no longer in the school system, because we had it pretty good if you look at how much it would cost to send our kids somewhere else and what burden we were on the town while our kids were there. So I do feel it's our responsibility to continue to fund schools, even after our kids are gone, keeping in mind that we were getting a pretty good deal by not paying the actual cost through our taxes to educate our kids. That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Could I ask a question?
Please?
Sorry, decided late here. Hi, Ryan Aruda for 4 Westland Circle. I think, Heather, I think you stole my thunder a little bit, but I just want to ask this question. What is the #1 draw typically for new folks coming into a town? Do you know offhand?
I assume the school system, but I don't know.
It is, especially in Massachusetts, ranked #1 in education. But I'm just curious because I see taxation is the largest portion of our revenue here, but we also know that schools are the largest, component of the pie when it comes to expenses. Imagining a scenario where we do not have a glut of new development or a glut of new business coming in, what if we didn't attract new people to replace homes or residents that have gone fallow? We would then have a problem, right? So we would want to keep those strong schools to attract new families. Does that make sense? I want to make sure I'm not, imagining this in my head.
Absolutely correct.
Well, it's correct, but with one proviso. We have very little buildable land. As much as you might want to attract people to town, there's not a lot of land to build anything on. So as far as the new growth, this year the number was $75,000 of new growth. Last year it was 150, 170,000. But we don't have direct control over it. It's what are the builders doing. There are some 40B projects that have some potential of bringing in reasonable money.
Sure.
But no matter how attractive we try to make the community, if there's only so much land, there's only so much we can do.
Right. So I'm guessing, but if the schools were to degrade or were to be seen as not as desirable, that would end up falling more on the taxpayers to fund these costs that aren't going away.
Well, it would, in theory, devalue the homes, which is probably the primary thing people could or should be concerned with.
Sure.
But, the base is still there. Whatever you're paying for taxes, they're not going to go down just because the schools are not as good if we were to cut schools.
Sure.
It doesn't, that's a net negative no matter how you look at it.
Right. And I think I'd like to echo the gentleman who came before saying that, at least for some, I'm biased because I have a child in the school, but I also think in terms of civics, in terms of having a civic duty to take care of everyone in town, as much as I don't use the senior center ever except to vote and come to things like this, thank you so much for putting this together. I think I want seniors to have access to this. I want seniors to have access to the library as much as kids and other families do. So I'd hope that would be in the messaging, that it's not just an expense, it's something that really enriches the town because we want to have more educated residents. We want to have students that, aren't at a disadvantage when it comes to growing up and whether they stay or move away. And, mostly because I don't want the school to instead, I asked my daughter if she wants to, go into the coal mine or turn Major Edwards into a textile factory, and I don't think she's, too keen on that. So I'd hope in the messaging that we sort of get that across, that this is, it's not just, the school is not just the largest expense in the town, it's something that is really the heartbeat of not only current generations, but what will come after us.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
And that's a yes vote for the override.
What's that?
Yeah.
That's a yes vote for the override?
Well, I was thinking if we could maybe, go turn the Old Stone Church into, I don't know, a coal vein or something. We could send all the children of Major Edwards. Right?
I might agree with you.
Can children be firefighters?
Okay, I think we've reached the time of the evening where we've gotten silly, so. Reminders, please come to town meeting and please vote. We historically, last year, there were comments in the earlier meeting, we had to wait almost 2 hours to get a quorum, and the meeting ran till midnight. Hopefully we don't have to do that. Please ask your friends and neighbors, show up to town meeting so we can have an on-time vote and a quorum.
It's starting at 6.
It starts at 6 this year. They moved the time up based on feedback from residents. So again, thank you all. If you have other questions, we're certainly here to try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.